Jeffrey Dahmer soaked in blood. The Unabomber blowing up. Waco, Texas, and Heaven's Gates. Aliens modified, meant from apes. JFK shot in the head by the CIA. Bigfoot and the Mothman. Son of Sam talking to dogs again. Witches, ghosts, and goblins. Mysterious noise and hauntings. Dark arts in the skull and bones. Most celebrities are probably cloned. So if you're feeling all alone, crack a beer and get stoned. I welcome you to the podcast Strange Brew. We're here to entertain you. We're here to entertain you.
It's about to get strange.
Welcome everybody back to the show. Welcome back. I am Tomcat, aka Tom Thompson, the Reptilian, and welcome to another episode of Strange Brew Podcast. I have a brand new guest, someone that I'm excited for people to hear. Could you introduce yourself?
Hey y'all, I'm MK. I am a TikToker who focuses on politics, nationalism, just really trying to chat with people and get the message out about, well, most of the problems we have in the world today. I think that's about it.
Yeah, so I discovered you where I saw videos. I've done a couple of videos that went viral, essentially talking about Canadian nationalism, and I saw your videos, and I've never seen someone do what you're doing. What a lot of people are doing is trying to embrace nationalism and stuff like that. And I've never seen anyone do it in such an articulate way as you, where you present the information and you show essentially where you got this information from. And the one thing that I praise you on is you're able to combat comments, which I just want to tear somebody's head off when I see some of these comments where I'm like, these people with low IQs that don't understand literally anything, and most of them have been brainwashed by algorithms and stuff like that. I've never seen someone do it in the way that you've done it, where it's very intelligent and articulate, where people can really grasp what you're saying and see the evidence that you back up to prove the claims, essentially, right?
Thank you. Oh, I really appreciate that. And honestly, that was one of my goals with doing it, is I feel like people are put in these echo chambers, and that's why it is important, at least to get a different perspective, because a lot of people don't do it because they're scared of backlash, things along that nature, and I totally get that. But we don't have that much time left before we're going to hit a point where it's really hard to go back from.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's interesting because I was someone who was always awake to this stuff. I've always been anti-government, especially because the music that I listened to when I was younger, the music that I created when I got a little older. I've always been like the idea of the Illuminati and like a central power control system that is being used to manipulate us at every angle. Like I knew this stuff for a very long time, like since I was probably like 15, 16, when I started really like looking into that. 17, I'd start reading books by people like David Icke and stuff and watching his videos. And so I've always been aware of this, but I was always more like, kumbaya, everybody get along because they're coming after all of us. But it wasn't until recently, in the last couple of years, especially the last, like, I would say 3 or 4 years, that I've actually embraced my essentially national identity. Because before that, I just wanted everybody to realize what was happening. And then everyone needs to use the power of the people to collectivize and resist against these authoritarian tyrants, right? But it wasn't until recently when I saw, to me, the systematic destruction of white people more than any other ethnicity or race or anything, and that made me I almost like something happened in the universe to force me to embrace this idea.
Yes, and I was pretty similar. I always believed in conspiracy theories, but what really woke me up is, I guess the best way to put it is, if you look at just America or just Canada, it looks like, okay, maybe bad policy choice, bad immigration plan. But if you look at every single Northwestern European country, it becomes really clear there's a bigger plot here and something's going on. And these are the only countries that are expected to take in a replacement level of immigration, let's be real.
Yeah.
Once you notice on a global scale, it's not just happening here and there's nowhere for us to run to if our homelands are destroyed. I think that's really what gets people amped up and aware of the wanting to solve it.
Yeah, and people are seeing this more and more now and starting to realize what's happening. And even people from other countries, it's interesting. Even on the one of the videos I've done, where it's like, oh, this is happening in Sweden, this is happening in Australia, this is happening in England, this is happening in Ireland. One of my co-hosts of the show is from Ireland, and it's happening there too, and it's quite clear. And now everyone is starting to see this, but it is true that, like I said this the other day, I was like, okay, if this was just happening in Canada, I might be like, okay, that we just have terrible leaders, and obviously someone like Trudeau, who is a communist, his father was a communist, and a lot of the stuff the Americans might not know is like before I think 1965, you had to be of European descent to immigrate into Canada, and they changed the ensign flag, I believe the actual real Canadian flag. If I could have put it up on the background, I would have. Instead of, I wanted to blend the United States and Canada, but it showed the ethnic makeup of, it had the Union Jack, and then it had a little emblem which showed the founding people that built the country, which was the English, the Scottish, the Irish, and the French. So it showed our national identity. And then in 1957, the Liberal government changed it to the corporate symbol that we have today.
Gotcha. Yeah, similar in the US. I believe ours was 1965 or 1964 or something like that. But before that, our immigration was almost solely people of Northwestern European descent. I think we let in like something like 2% of select countries, a certain high skilled or jobs people didn't want to do, but it was mostly European for hundreds of years.
And it's crazy because in Canada, we're not bringing in people that I think are people that will benefit this country. I think it's people that will destroy the country, considering what their own countries look like. Like, they're not bringing a bunch of people from Japan. China's one thing, because China kind of, like, it seems like owns most of our politicians in Canada. So it is interesting that it's in Canada specifically, it's just fucking Indian people everywhere. That's
here now, and they already did that to y'all and Australia. Like, are we going to do the exact same thing in America? That clearly didn't work either of these places.
And it seems like Trump is all on board for it. I don't know. What do you think of Trump?
I mean, he was the clear better option of the two, because the other one was an actual communist.
Yeah.
But I think he's an excellent salesperson. I think he does a really good job of getting people hyped up for things, but at the end of the day, he's a salesperson. His job is to sell you on things that aren't going to be beneficial. And you'll notice bipartisan, what they agree on are harmful policies. So both sides of the aisle are bought out. I would say big tech has made a deal with India, though. Seems pretty with like Microsoft government contracts and them laying off Americans and wanting to bring in a bunch of Indians.
Yeah, it's quite clear. It seems like what's happening. And my point of view is like, Trump is going to have the most Zionist government to ever exist in America, right? And it's interesting because I should ask you some more questions before we get into like the deeper end of this stuff. Is like, what drove you to want to start talking about this stuff? Like, what really? Because how old are you?
25.
Yeah, pretty good. I'm 33. So like, it's interesting to see someone as young as you that embraced nationalism, because people have been, I think the scariest thing to the people in power is nationalism, and it is people uniting and realizing that they're a collective people and that they all should be essentially pushing for their own benefit of their own people and taking care of their own. And then multiculturalism has only destroyed that. So what made you kind of really start wanting to speak out against this stuff?
I mean, honestly, I just think it's getting to a point that if we don't do something, we're not going to be able to recover from it. And I mean, we're being genocided. And then at the same time, I feel like it's a very moral take to have. I'm not ashamed of wanting my country to serve me. And I think everyone's country should do that. Like, in that respect, obviously the US is causing problems around the world. But at the end of the day, white people have no control in that, yet we're blamed for it. I don't
100%.
know. Is us getting more control and not having our government be a huge mess, because we could actually help other countries if we did that.
Yeah, and it is, because you think about this, right? Like I was just bringing up the definition of genocide. I hate going with Google, but Google will give me a better one than DuckDuckGo. And I think DuckDuckGo is owned by Google anyway. But it is because it's a systematic destruction of a certain group of people. And that is what is happening. And a lot of people, the deliberate killing, Jesus, this thing got in the way. The deliberate killing of large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. And if you look at what's happening only in the Western world and only to white people, you can't be racist against anybody else, but white people are like labeled as racist, but yet no one else can be racist. It's crazy. And I've clearly saw this happening within a couple of years. It was just pushed on us. And to me, I've read into the New World Order a lot. I read a lot of books, and I try to gain as much knowledge as I can. And one of the goals was, a fake pandemic, essentially to lock down a population. But then one of the final steps to bring about the New World Order was flooding the country with immigrants, mass immigration. Some people were writing about almost like 100 years ago.
Yes, yeah, there is that plan that they like to say is a hoax or a conspiracy theory, but the thing is, it is happening. So it's definitely not a natural thing. I don't know anyone really that wanted to be flooded with immigrants. I know even the people, now there's leftists and they'll die on the hill that they always wanted open borders, mass immigration. But the thing is, no one ever voted for this. And no one's really against legal regulated numbers of immigration, but clearly this has got to a point where it's obviously destroying the country.
Yeah, that's the point. And if it was just one country, it would be one thing, and I'm sure other people would be standing up for that country, but it's not. It's systematically happening around the Western world. And it is interesting because I used to be like more, I would say libertarian, which is like, okay, we don't need borders. Everyone needs to collectivize and become a unit and realize there's power within the people. I like Charlie Chaplin a lot growing up and stuff like that. And some of the speeches that he's done, I've put in my songs because I agreed with mostly what he said about the way that the direction of the world should go. And, at the end of the day, like this idea that, okay, I believe that there's probably forces outside of our eyesight maybe contributing to some of the how should I say this, to consuming our energy in some regard. But the thing is, this idea of like everyone banding together and realizing that we're on one collective consciousness that goes beyond this reality is not going to happen in my lifetime. I don't see it happening. So watching this happening to the whole Western world is crazy, and people trying to justify it blows my mind. Especially, I'd like to hear your take on this, the whole idea of like, oh, this is stolen land. I just did a video talking about this, and if anybody's listening and watching and want to check this out, this is a good book to get. It's called Not Stolen. It's truth about European colonization in the New World. It's a pretty big book, and renowned historian debunks current distortions and myths about the European colonialism in the New World and restores much needed balance to understanding of the past. I've got just into it, but the guy it's really good. So what do you think when people say that and they try to justify, well, you guys stole land, so you don't deserve it? What do you say to them? Because I've seen you do videos on stuff like this.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because if they think it's Native American land, then technically they're coming and stealing their land too. So they have no moral ground with that argument. And also the land was conquered. That's how every single other country came to be. There's not a single land on this earth that has not passed ownership around. So I think any modern claim of being indigenous there obviously were people here. I don't think we should kick Native Americans out by any means, but we didn't. And that's what makes it in a lot of other places that were conquered is we have taken them in. They're now Americans. They have the exact same rights as us. I feel like we treat them well. And it's been really, really interesting actually posting about it because so many Native Americans have reached out and have sent the nicest messages of, hey, like we would never be pushing any of this. We don't want y'all to be genocided. So the people I see actually making the stolen land argument are normally leftists. Like it's not even the Native Americans.
Yeah, it's usually, in my opinion, what I've seen with my videos is most of them are usually faceless accounts or whatever, but a lot of them are Indians from India, and they want to use that as they want to claim that as a justification for their colonization. And that video that won't even post on TikTok that I tried, where essentially an Indian guy or some guy with some weird name, Suck Deep or Man Deep or all there's some of their names are, I'm like, you're just a joke in itself. You don't even realize it. Is that they were trying to claim that like, that Canada is for the Indian people because the British Empire essentially used some of the resources from India to build Canada. And that's not necessarily true. Some of it is they did use some resources. And when I did a video to respond, it went up on Instagram, but TikTok would not allow me to post it. As I said, I'm like, this idea that you guys could try to justify this, and your people did nothing to build this country. The roads, the infrastructure, the buildings, the cities, the towns were all built by my ancestors, the Europeans who came here. And it wasn't just the British Empire. It was the French Empire. The French came here first in 1550 and started like participating in the fur trades and fishing, and they were met with the indigenous. And the interesting thing is, I like to bring up a lot. I had a veteran on the show who worked in Nunavut and stuff like that, and actually supports the indigenous communities. I've had a lot of them reach out to me and agree with the sentiments that I have about what's going on. A lot of them actually, and there's these prophecies like the Seven Fires prophecy, who they claim that they were already in contact and living in harmony with white people before the Europeans showed up. And there's actually stories of the Wagas, which were white giants that a native tribe in I think it's North Dakota met with, and they gave them the symbol of the swastika that they put on all their clothing. Have you heard about stuff like this?
That's really interesting. I did have someone message me that is a Native American, and they were telling me about the legend of the moon-eyed people, which was really, really tall, very pale, blue-eyed white people that were on the land when they got there. So there is claims that we are technically indigenous as well. But in my opinion, it really doesn't matter as much, because at the end of the day, the USA and Canada, for that matter, they didn't exist until our ancestors built it from the ground. So I think, they come in and say it's stolen land. Well, if we were to burn down everything here, would you want that land still? Because you don't want the land, you want what we built upon the land.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. That's a good point. I'm gonna use that. And it is interesting because that my ancestors and because I traced one of my grandma's bloodlines back to 1604 in Canada, and then before that, her bloodline goes to America, and then it stops. Like I don't know where we were before that, and I do have like oval eyes. And so very blue. So I don't know, but there's people that are like, you look like you could be Asian or a native. And I was like, I don't know how far back it goes. And the other side of my family's been here since I think this early 1700s. So like people have been here for hundreds of years, put their blood, sweat, and tears into building these countries. And then they have the audacity to tell us to go back to Europe, even though their people are just wanting to utilize the social services that they couldn't build, the infrastructure that they couldn't build, or they would have. That's why, like, it's crazy to me when the audacity and the entitlement of specifically Indian people is the craziest shit that I've ever heard in my life. Now, I've literally had people from Africa agree with what I'm saying about my national identity and how the country was built. And it's only their people, it seems like, other than some brainwashed white leftists, that really want to like try to impose their traditions, their culture on another culture because, it happened to them. And they were begging the British government to come back because as soon as they left, their country went to shit.
Yes, no, and that's what's so funny about India's claims too, is from my understanding, when the British came, there was like 20 to 30,000 of them. So way less that are even in America and definitely Canada today. And millions of people, for some reason, they were able to conquer them. Like,
with a couple, with 20,000 troops.
Like, there's no way you could force 1 million people under your will. Like, they had to choose to go along with it, and they did because they were more technologically advanced. They were able to extract those resources that, quite frankly, no one was doing anything with.
Yeah, and they're still not doing it. They were in like people are talking about me, but they're building like temples for monkeys and rats and the problem is too is like even with that guy's claim of like Canada belongs to Indians is the craziest shit I've ever heard in my life. I've never heard anything like that. And I'm like born and raised here, been Canadian all of my life, know nothing else but this country. And I remember what it was like in the 90s and early 2000s when people had a national identity. So I couldn't imagine the people in the older generations. And if they then fix your own country, like you can't even fix your own country. They have a massive garbage pile on fire right next to the Taj Mahal that is just building like every day tons and tons of garbage goes onto this garbage pile. And then they have the highest rate of pollution in the entire world. The garbage in the ocean is mostly caused by them that they throw in the river. And then it goes into the ocean, probably that massive garbage pile that ships have to like drive around and actually need to know where it is so they don't hit it was probably caused by them. And then so they've destroyed their own country. And I even had a comment which is even crazy, like so crazy people say some of the stuff like this. Someone was like, well, India is overpopulated, where do you want us to go? And I'm like, how can you justify that? You guys don't understand the concept of maybe waiting to have kids or using contraceptives or even just condoms in general, but yet you overbred, you breeded like rats, and then you want everybody else to have to take care of your irresponsible birth rate is crazy.
Yes, no, and it frustrates me when people are like, well, if you're so concerned, just have more kids. Like, I shouldn't have to have 12 kids to outcompete people my government is bringing in. And quite frankly, I don't want 12 kids. Like, I'd love to have a big family, but I should not feel like I have to do something. And that's a crazy amount of kids anyway. Like, if you're not able to provide for that. And that's another cultural difference is I've noticed European people typically have the number of kids they can afford. We think ahead. We want to give them a good life. And I feel very similar to that. If I couldn't afford to have 10 kids, I would be responsible. I don't know.
Yeah, and they don't care because they have like, especially even let's bring in somebody else so we're not just generalizing, because I don't think all Indian people are bad or anything like that. I want people to know when these conversations are happening, and it's even the stuff I've said on the show, I'm always like, I care about all people. I actually am an advocate for rights for all humans and rights and freedoms for everybody. But there is problems with certain cultures. Not all cultures and people are the same. That's a lie that has been fed by the communists, that we can all become equal. Yeah, they all want to bring you down to the poverty level, and then we can all be equal together as we're as indentured slaves to a system, right? So and the thing is that their IQ is pretty low. They are not educated, but yet they all were CEOs and we're all this stuff. And it's just like, yeah, but we can't even compete with populations that already have billions of people, and then they have like 5-10 kids, don't actually choose, more than that probably, don't even choose to educate them because they can't even take care of them. So they just kind of run wild. And this happens in Muslim countries too, where they have like a couple of different wives, or now I think it was in Iran that they passed a thing where you can have a child bride, 9 years old, you can marry a little girl, and then the boys can get married at 16, which is crazy. And then so you have all of these kids, and then you're not teaching them. It seems like they don't even care for their own people. They just want to breed to replace everybody else and enforce their population cultural dominance over the world.
Yes, and I kind of feel the same, where it's like in your own country, I don't really care unless they're actively violating the rights of citizens or doing something really evil. I don't think we should intervene. But to go to your point earlier where you said you wanted unity worldwide, I think the only way that could happen is if everyone is in their own place, in their own tribe. And that's the biggest problem with the US is we spend so much time fighting over identity politics that all these evil things are able to get passed. There's so much distraction, and it's just human nature. People lived with their own kind for thousands of years before this kind of multicultural experiment was forced on us. So I feel like we're basically rejecting what science, what history, what everything has told us by being like, oh, well, we know better, we're so progressive, but it's not progressive because it hasn't moved things forward, if that makes sense.
No, it doesn't. And I've said this before on the show, is like the idea of diversity just means division, because the more people that you bring in with different cultures, ethnicities, languages, religions, it only causes more and more division, especially for the population that already existed here. And doing it maybe slow like Canada does, because in Canada in the 80s and 90s, in the early 2000s, even like was people were kind of able to get along because it was slow and gradual, and people kind of assimilated and blended and adapted to the culture that already existed here. But once you flood a country with millions of people in the matter of a couple of years, they're just bringing their own cultural identity and taking over the one that already exists here. And they claim they didn't like it when the British did, even though it built everything for them in India, because it's a big problem in Canada. Like it's a huge problem, and everybody is noticing it. That this is the new India, and there's a lot of nationalist groups that are getting pissed and starting to like essentially work out and get built and make sure that they can protect their children against what's coming, because the crime rate has gone through the roof, because you're bringing in people that live in countries that are really corrupt, and their only means of survival is usually crime. So there was even one of the biggest drug labs ever busted in Canada, and it was controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and then it was run by Punjabi Indians. And everyone's like, the Sikhs are great, and I'm like, no, I don't think any of them are really that great for what our country is and for what our culture is. They're not like us. And that there's something that people need to acknowledge, is that people are different. Cultures are different. Not everybody is equal. Not all cultures in my eyes are good. The same thing with like, there's some Muslims that are, I think, decent, good people. And then there's the ones that are the extremist Muslims. And I don't even like the word extremist, but people that have been so indoctrinated by their doctrine that they use this to essentially justify their actions of barbarity.
Yes, no, exactly. And I think that's the biggest problem, is you can obviously bring a couple Muslims in, and that's no big deal. They're forced to assimilate to a larger culture. But when the culture is so split, people always say our countries have no culture. And honestly, they're not wrong, because the culture now is basically you come and assimilate to hating white people is the dominant culture. And it's so inclusive that even white people can partake in this hatred of white people.
That's crazy. And it's because there used to be a cultural identity. That's why I laugh, because people are like, what culture? There was a cultural identity of what made Canadians Canadian, right? Because those people, those Europeans that blended together. And there's footage of this. There's literally television shows from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s that like showed you. We used to have Canadian heritage on a commercial. They don't do this anymore because they don't want people to remember who they are. And it would show like, this happened. This is your cultural heritage. This happened at this time. Like even I remember I can never forget the one where it's like a bunch of white guys playing basketball, and then the guy was like shooting the basketball in a little bucket, and the guy was like, what if we cut a hole in it? And then so like, because it was like essentially made here, and people started playing basketball, right? White people invented that shit. And now so
yes, no, it's crazy. I was watching, I don't remember the name of this movie. It has Heath Ledger in it, and it was about Rome, the Roman Empire, and they said something like Jesus was a white Englishman. And I was like, if they said that today in a movie, imagine the backlash. It was also in this movie because it's a movie about Rome and England. So it's just interesting because today they don't allow it. They force, I guess the best way to put it for me is I don't mind natural diversity. I think diversity of thought is great. I don't really care what your skin tone is. But this forced diversity is just making everybody hate each other. And it clearly is not working. And so many people are just afraid to, I guess, change their mind. They want to die on this hill that they'll defend it, even though, like I said, no one voted for this, when it's ultimately going to be harmful, not just for white people, but for everyone worldwide. Like if white people are going to hurt the entire planet.
Yeah, if white people just disappeared tomorrow, that's why it's like if we all went back to Europe like they want us to do. You know how the fast America and Canada would just fall apart and be dismantled and stuff like that? Like 80% of the inventions were invented by white people. This is like a fact. People need to like embrace what is actually happening. And it's interesting because even like even the black people that have been here for a while and stuff like that, because they fled slavery from the States, which was facilitated by Jewish people. That's a fact. Most of the slave ships were owned by Jews, and I think it's 0.8% of white people actually owned slave. The rest were Jewish. So, and then they came to Canada. And there's a video of I have an aunt. She's Jamaican. She's from Jamaica. She's like more like a white Jamaican. She must some of the settlers showed up over there and stuff like that at one point, because people were going all over it. And a point that you made that I liked is like, you know, we found a new land, and you think they're just going to turn around and not try to venture and figure out what's on this side of the world, because people are like, why would they just turn around?
Yeah, and why were they on the boats in the first place? They were fleeing.
Yeah.
Anywhere they turned up, they probably would have done the same thing, or at least tried to. And honestly, I think the Native Americans were lucky it was Europeans. Not that that was all sunshine and rainbows, but when I look at other countries' actions, and that's what our education lacks, we were a lot more humane, I would say, and that's not to say we were humane. It was a barbaric time. But when you look, especially today, we pay billions of dollars a year to Indian reservations. They still have dedicated lands. They're tax-free. We help them out. I'm far less bothered by that than I am bringing in foreigners, because I at least feel like I share heritage with Native Americans. We've lived together hundreds of years. And same with Black people that are born in America and descend from slaves. I think that's part of why they're bringing Indians in, is I think at the end of the day, a lot of Black people would end up siding with us. If we were to go full nationalist, say, okay, original stock, they would side with white people over Zionists.
And I see this too, because I was bringing up the point is that there was a woman that moved to Brampton. We call it Bramladesh. And it's interesting because I was in the 90s. I always heard that joke, and I never went there. I got a cousin in Toronto. I used to hang out in Toronto a lot. It was always diverse. And it's interesting that this woman showed up. She just moved here from Jamaica, and she was like, it's just all Indian people. Where is all the white people? She was literally filming herself like in the supermarket, be like, where is everybody else? Why is it only this specific people?
Especially of Canada, just it looks like India. It doesn't look like Canada at all.
No.
Is it bad outside of the big cities? Is what I wanted to ask you.
It's getting there now. I'm in a small town. Luckily, they'll push people out if they need to. But in a smaller city, it's about an hour and a half from Toronto. It's starting to look like India too. Like they're taking over everywhere. A small town that I grew up in, they've built all of these housing complexes, and then I've driven there. Like it was this small little quaint, nice, beautiful town, and now they've built all these housing infrastructure, and I just see like old Indian guys walking around. And the thing is, before you had to like be of perfect health, you couldn't be elderly, and the liberals changed that. So you have a bunch of people that never paid into the system at all come to this country, and then they get to utilize the social services and the infrastructure and everything that the people that spent centuries building and facilitating for their own people. And then they just people just get to walk in and use it. And in Canada, we're paying like $16 billion to refugees who shouldn't be here in the first place. That's just illegal immigrants. And we're paying them $243 a day. That's more than the average Canadian makes a day.
It's nuts. And when you think about it that way, it's like, we have all this money. Why would we? I don't think we should do this either, but why wouldn't we help them in their own countries? America is only 4% of the land in the entire world. Like realistically, not everyone can move to America. So why would we not use that money to help them build infrastructure and I guess colonize them, which is the world's greatest fear? Like if they want infrastructure like Americans, we could probably contract Americans to go build that.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And even like with this, like I think it's interesting because like I grew up with Indigenous friends. I played football with a bunch of natives and stuff like that. And I had like close friends that were native and stuff. And my patience is starting to wear thin with their rhetoric also, because we've paid them this year alone $30.5 billion, billions of dollars. And then they're crying about having clean water. If you gave white people a piece of land, don't give them any money, just whatever money they had, they would build it from nothing. That's a fact. There's a guy named Devin Stacked, I think his name is, the guy that does the Black Pilled, and he talks about that. He's like, give a reserve, like say the Navajo Reserve. If we're so evil and racist, give us a spot of land. And he was like, watch within a couple of years, everyone be banging on that door wanting to come in. And the thing is, what happens, sadly, and it's true, Indigenous women go missing. I think there's a lot of conspiracies about that their bloodline, for some reason, the parasites, the elites or whatever, find their blood interesting and want to use it. So that
Didn't know that.
yeah, it's weird. So there's a lot of Indigenous women that go missing in Canada. It's like it's pretty bizarre. There's a highway of tears, and then so. A lot of what happens too, which is sad, is like a lot of the money gets taken out by the chiefs, and they, just like how politicians do, they steal a lot of the money and then use it to benefit themselves and not even their own people. And I'm really close to a reserve, and I drive through it. I've been there with buddies getting smokes, and there's nothing. They're building nothing. It's like gas station, smoke shop, gas station, smoke shop, weed shop, gas station, smoke shop. It's like there's nothing else there. They're not utilizing the land to even grow crops a lot of times. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, you're kind of doing it to yourself. You want to play this whole victimhood, and there is people. And this is also, and this is not against Indigenous people, because it's just a point that I need to make, is that they will get off with crimes. Like there's people that I knew that got hit by a drunk driving Native, and he got off free because scot-free because of ancestral trauma. And this has happened numerous times where people have gotten away with murder, literally murdering people because of ancestral trauma, and they'll let them free.
Yes, no, and that's the problem. I would say, to the point of nationalism, one of the reasons we need that so bad is we give all this money, not just to natives, but to countries all over, and we never ask for an accounting on it. So that money, I would say, is likely being laundered and going to a select few. So even though we do try to help all these countries, the people of those countries don't understand that, because it's not actually going to help them. So I'm not necessarily anti-foreign aid. If we're doing so well, we have so much excess wealth, like how it used to be, I'm okay with us going and helping other countries. I kind of feel like we have a duty to do that, but we also have a duty to get an accounting to make sure that money is actually being used for the right things. And I'd rather do it in a way where if a country needed something, they make a request for that one thing. So say it's plumbing or water pipes.
Yeah.
And then we'd go through, see what an accurate budget of this would look like, give them that amount of money, and make sure it's actually done, and no money if it isn't actually done. We stop dealing with countries that are just looking to take advantage of us.
And that's what a lot of countries are doing. And the thing is, it's interesting. Look at South Africa, right? There was nobody really there. That's a fact, man. And then white people went and settled that country and built it literally from nothing. There was like literally no tribes there. There's not a lot of people actually there. Then they claimed, this is stolen land and all this shit. And then they moved to another spot, built it from nothing, and they're still complaining. And it's crazy that if you gave that to any other race, it wouldn't be the same thing. And that's what people have to understand. There is differences. Africa's been around forever. And I know there's things that are being done to obviously destroy people on face of everything, right? And that they're being held down in some regard too. But now, because of all the stuff that they're probably being fed by the communist Western governments and stuff like that, they're like literally going around and killing white people. There's stories about them holding children down and pouring boiling hot water into the children's mouth while the parents watch. Stuff like that.
Yes. Have you seen the road of crosses they have there for just
No.
full white farmer South African that's been killed since apartheid ended? I watched a 3-minute video of it, and I was trying to get an estimate of how big those numbers were, and the best one I could find was around 70,000. So when you compare the apartheid prior, not that that was a good system, I'm not celebrating apartheid, but if you're going to be killed, if you don't live separately from these people, is it morally wrong to want to? Personally, I think no. I don't see that as or I guess I would say I don't see living near anyone as a human right per se. You have the right to have your place and have that how you like it, but you don't have the right to come in and kill people because you want to take their things. And obviously those people aren't going to want to live with you. It's a pure safety matter.
Yeah, it's crazy. There is, and this is like, people don't want to acknowledge it, but there is a white genocide going on, and it's quite clear every day. I see it. I've read into it a lot, and I truly believe that this comes from communist ideologies, right? Interestingly enough, I heard you talk about the Bolshevik Revolution. A lot of people don't know about that, and I was going to ask you, where did you acquire your knowledge? When did you start reading into this stuff? Because like a lot of people don't know about the Holodomor and some of these things that they're literally trying to erase from history, so white people don't realize that this is already, especially Christians, this has already been done to us.
Yeah, no, the last 150 years, honestly, for Christians hasn't been that great if you look outside of our countries. I started looking into it. I want to say Candace Owens started talking about the Bolshevik Revolution, or maybe it was someone on Twitter. But I read this book. It's called The Gulag Archipelago. And I highly, highly recommend it. It used to be required reading because people are sold Marxism or communism, really the same thing. And they don't ever talk about the bad sides of it. They don't talk about the lived experience of people who actually went through it. And it comes from this almost like utopia thinking of people want to create equality and a utopia everywhere. But all that's ever done has made people starve, basically. It's never worked. We've tried it. Maybe it was an okay idea at the time, but now we have like a century of evidence that says it's not. So I think people, to your point earlier, really need to kill the idea of equality. Life isn't fair. That's
Nothing Nothing in nature is equal. I actually have like a whole, I told my buddy, I was like, I have like a whole thing of communists like ready to go, but I'm like, it might take us a long time because I have the entire breakdown of like when it first popped off to like to Vietnam and Cuba, and it's like I found a bunch of information. I find these like really crazy sites that like most people wouldn't be able to find, but stuff that outlines a bunch of people would consider conspiracy stuff, but it's more of truth shedding light, like the Tavistock Institution and stuff like that. And it is interesting because I started looking into the Bolshevik Revolution. I didn't hear about it until like a couple years ago. And it is interesting because it was facilitated by pretty much Jewish people. Leon Trotsky, Karl Marx, who's that other guy? Lenin. And it was facilitated, I think, to destroy white people in general. And that's funny when even you talk about people's lived experiences. And it's a crazy world we live in. When people that weren't alive back then will jail a 93-year-old woman for saying that the things that happened in Nazi Germany are not what they're telling you. And she essentially said that what you're being shown about the Holocaust through Hollywood is not true in the way they've shown it. And she experienced it, and she got put in jail and died in there for speaking out against it.
It's crazy. And the number of communists that have told me, oh, well, you're just an aristocrat, you don't get it. And I'm like, you realize we have refugees in America that have fled communist regimes? Why don't you ask any one of them and listen to what they say? Because they're the most anti-communist people you'll ever meet. They're normally conservative because they watch their country go through hell. But people aren't willing to consider that outside of what they're told, there might be another side to it. So I don't have a problem with teaching Western history accurately. I don't think everything we've done is great. We've obviously committed atrocities. The thing is, we don't apologize for those people. Like, we're not making excuses for them. Like, there's another side to that where it's like, okay, was it for the good of all people that we did some of those things? Like the Aztecs, for example, if they were doing human sacrifices, is it bad that the Spanish came in and conquered them and made them stop? In my opinion, no.
Yeah, well, that's what you have too with the indigenous, that a lot of people want to be like, they weren't this like peaceful people that everyone wants to claim that they were. There's tribes that don't exist anymore because another tribe genocided them, and that's like a fact. They killed each other. Dude, say again.
Tribes they wanted to knock out. So it's, if you were to give the land back to them, which ones and where was their land? They moved around, a lot of them.
Yeah, there were nomadic tribes that probably came from Southeast Asia and stuff like that. So, and it is crazy. That's one of the reasons why they try to justify it. And it's like they were like killing each other and conquering each other, but somehow they were this innocent people that were living in peace and all that stuff. And they were cannibalizing each other. A lot of tribes, it's like killed their enemies and then ate them and stuff like that, tore out their hearts. The crazy, and then there's people trying to like justify all this stuff. And the thing is, my problem too is I want to scream this from the rooftop sometimes, but it's like, you can't justify what's happening now by bringing up atrocities that happened in the past that nobody has anything to do with today and was mostly done at the hands of oligarchs, politicians, and corrupt governments that weren't in favor of the people and weren't representatives of the people and still aren't today. So it's like, well, I see this comment a lot. Well, the Western people did this. Your people did this. Your people did that. My people didn't do anything. My ancestors and the people that came here to build this country out of nothing barely made it here alive, crossing the ocean on boats, had to endure the elements, not to mention the people that are trying to kill them when they showed up here, because a lot of Europeans showed up here and they were killed. The indigenous tribes were slaughtering European children, scalping them, doing like crazy stuff like that. And then so obviously you have to understand history and why certain things happen and why people retaliated. And 95% of the indigenous died because of disease. Yeah. I believe it was unintentional.
I do too, because it's never been proven that they were given a smallpox blanket or whatever they.
Yeah.
And how would you know that? Like, I don't know. Like, you could innocently give someone a blanket, not realizing it could give them smallpox. And maybe it did happen, but if it did, that was probably the actions of a few people. It wasn't the entire public conspired. So I don't really consider it genocide. Is it sad? Yes.
Yes.
But it's not like they came in and just were like, let's kill everybody. Like,
and I don't believe that's what happened. The French settlers made agreements with the indigenous, and they met them with kindness. Like I want to get through this book so I can talk more about it, but I do think everyone should read this because the guy is he lays it out. I'm gonna listen. He did a talk recently, and I'm gonna listen to his talk because it's interesting to have a point of view like that. There's also a guy named Robert Zephyr. I think that's his name, does a lot of actually really good YouTube videos and breaks down like a lot of these stories about Aryans. And that's where I found out about the idea of the Wagas. And he shows you all the proof that there was supposed to be white giants. And it's interesting because a lot of people claim, specifically the Wagas it could have been Vikings, maybe that, but they're also like, they were, had orange hair. So people think they were like the Nephilim. There's like really weird stories about that, but even like the Vikings came here 1,000 years ago, settled in Newfoundland, and then eventually mostly probably just died out. But like when the French settlers came here, some of them married indigenous women and started like blending together, and the Métis were like created. It's like this idea. People, I believe, do not know anything about history. They don't know anything other than what they're told through an algorithm or through some sort of brainwashed Marxist teacher.
Yes, no, and the Marxist stuff, now that I know about it and have researched it, I spot it really easily, and it just irritates me to no end, because it's just a way to make excuses for people. Like, I don't care if someone came from a poor background. If you kill someone or you rape someone, you should go to jail. And I would hold myself to the same standard, so I don't think it's unfair.
It's crazy. This idea of like, so if say someone like when trying to justify this. So if my great-great-grandfather punched your great-great-grandfather in the face, does that give me the excuse to punch you in the face? Like, that's the mentality that these people have.
Yes, no, and they're basically the things they hate us for. They're saying, okay, well, I actually don't have a problem with these things as long as they're not done to me and I'm the one doing them. So it's like, you don't have a problem with genocide if I tell you we're being genocided and I can prove that, and you're celebrating it. So you celebrate genocide.
That's what they're doing. And
genocide you guys. I just personally would like to live separately.
Yes, and I think that people, if it, like this idea, I did a video and I was like, why is it racist? So if you want to keep India for the Indians, China for the Chinese, but you can't keep Scotland for the Scottish or Irish, Ireland for the Irish, and I said, or Canada for the Canadians, because we're colonizers. But it's like we built these countries out of nothing in the first place. But it's not racist to want this in any other country. And you think the Japanese give a shit what you think about them and their like national identity? they talk about race openly. And the interesting thing I do find, and I've talked to a couple of Asian people about this too, and I really like Arthur Kwan Lee. That guy is great. He actually advocates for for white people and sees what's happening to us. He's South Korean, and he was on Jake Shields' podcast. Jake, if you haven't heard Jake Shields, check out his show. He's guys like doing some great work and having very eye-opening conversations, including debates about the Holocaust and stuff. Like, I actually really appreciate Jake Shields. If I can ever get on the show, I will. But I was trying to get Arthur Kwan Lee on, but I've had a bunch of Asian people agree with me and say like, yeah, this is crazy. And they openly talk about race and racism mostly, or racial realism, and the idea that there is differences between us, and they don't want certain people in their countries because it destroys them. And then it's just the amount of stuff that has gone on to just systematically destroy white people all the evidence is there. And the more that people want to close their eyes and plug their ears and say it's not happening, the more that you will see the deaths of thousands of people. The amount of people that died because of mass immigration is gone through the roof. And those people, those little girls in England, all these children that have been systematically raped and killed by migrants would be alive today if none of this stuff was happening.
Yes, no, and that's why I hate the argument. And I've seen so much of this, especially with that UK grooming scandal coming up.
That's crazy.
Horrifying. It makes me want to cry to read what happened, but people will justify it and they'll try to be like, oh, well, white men rape too. Some white men are pedophiles. And again, yes, but they were at least born here. We can't avoid that being a problem. And B, we don't apologize for them. We do not condone that behavior. We're not making excuses. We're all asking for that Epstein list. And, you know, I would be fine with any white politician going to jail. I'd be fine with my brother going to jail if he did that. Like, I think it's wrong point blank, no matter who's doing it. And I think other countries have been trained to be a lot more tribalist. So they always look out and make excuses for their own because they don't want their own to look bad. And that's all good and well. But when you put that in a country where the majority population is not allowed to have any identity, you're not allowed to defend yourself, well, it's very obvious what that's going to lead to.
It's crazy. They're saying that the grooming Muslim gangs or whatever, they've systematically raped 200,000 little girls.
Yes, and they're overrepresented. Like, they commit 80%, or it's either 80 or 87% of all gang rapes. So why do we need this enrichment? Like, obviously, it's going to be a thing. You can't get rid of it. That's life. But you can certainly prevent very predictable outcomes and learn your lesson.
And those people didn't need to die. And the same thing I believe with even Palestine. Those children didn't need to die. People trying to justify what's happening over there. I've seen the footage. The Israeli soldiers were using children as dartboards. It's
woke me up. And I've had multiple times where I've told people, I have friends, they're from well-off white families that lost their job advocating for Palestine, and they have not been able to get rehired. So the idea that we don't care is ridiculous. But then when the same thing happens to us, no one defends us. So basically, if we don't collectivize, no one's going to come to our rescue, basically.
No, and all the governments are owned and bought and paid for by Israel and India, in my opinion. Like, there is at least over 50 MPs in Canada. I think it's all of them. I always say fuck the 338 because I think all of them are complicit in this genocide. You could say in this cultural destruction. They beat people in the streets with horses or with rifle butts and trample them with horses for them peacefully protesting, and not one politician, not PP, not none of these people stood up against that. They didn't rush out to the aid of the Canadian people. They reaped the benefits of what COVID did to people and how they made money off of all of it. And they give themselves raises every year without our consent. They steal from us. And like you were going to say earlier, like about politicians going to jail. I've never seen a politician ever go to jail in my lifetime, ever. And these people have done more to systematically destroy people, not just white people, but everyday people across this world than any other like job or like anything. It's crazy.
Yes, no, and I think there's this idea that power corrupts. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think power attracts the corrupt, especially if you have a corrupt system where only the most corrupt are ever going to rise to the top. Well, yeah, you're going to see rampant corruption. And that's one of the importances with nationalism is too. When people bring up things like Congo and how they're basically enslaving the people there, I think that's horrible. I think our corporations should not be allowed to do that. It's illegal and we should be enforcing that. But because we don't have good people that care about that, that can't happen. And with a divided population of us constantly at our throats, we can't get that. So it's not only destroying the US, but it has this big ripple effect with like Palestine as well. I think if white normal people like the WASPs who lost power were running the government, I don't think that would be happening. The problem is our politicians are sellouts, not that the average person wants this or benefits from it whatsoever.
No, and that's the problem I have too, is like with all these people, especially bringing up some of the indigenous stuff. And I care personally, like I care for my own people because I'm watching them get destroyed. But I care it's as much as I care about white people and just Canadians in general that have been here for generations. I also really care about the indigenous communities because I do think that they should have more representation in government. There is more people in parliament that are Indian and have dual citizenship with other countries than there is representation of the indigenous communities, which I think is really wrong, because I truly think that if you put some like good-hearted indigenous people in the government, things would change actually, but they don't want that in any regard, I believe, right? And there was a time where the indigenous and the especially the white European population, the real Canadians, because the people are like, I've seen on videos where I talk about what a Canadian is, because everyone wants to think it's this blended multiculturalist bullshit, and that's not true. That's not what we were founded on. That's not what generations of people, put their lives into. You look at the cenotaphs and the memorials, I don't see Singh or Paul Minder. I see like Thompson and Robertson. Those are the Canadian names that lived and died for this country, even though I do believe they were fighting on the side of the communists and didn't know it. I have a song that I wrote for essentially maybe I'll play at the end of this, but it was a song inspired by Jeremy Mackenzie. I don't know if you know who that is. He's like a Canadian nationalist. You ever heard Dagalon?
I don't think so. Maybe.
Yeah, we have some nationalist groups like kind of like Patriot Front and stuff like that, which I listen to Thomas Russo on Jake Shields' podcast, and I don't think the guy's a Fed. Everyone wants to be like, these guys are all Feds. It's because they don't want people to collectivize. And so he's like a nationalist, a very outspoken one. The whole reason the Emergency Act got called, they justified it by saying there was this white nationalist group. So he's very popular streamer here, one of the more outspoken dissidents of the government. And he did a speech, so I wrote a song about it. I talk about how like essentially that they fought and died for communism, but they unknowingly did it, right? Like, and so all these people that gave their lives for this country, those are the Canadian people at the end of the day. And you can't just show up here and then become Canadian because you walk on the magic dirt. That's not real. That doesn't make sense. I did this video where I was like, so if me and my wife go to India and we have a kid in India, would that make the kid Indian? No, it'd make maybe a citizen, but it wouldn't make the kid Indian.
Exactly. And I think they've intentionally muddied that line. And it's also why I don't advocate ever for America or Canada to be completely an ethno state. I think if we did that, it would be brain drain, and we should honestly keep our promises. So people that have lived here hundreds of years, we need to find a system that makes that work. I'm okay with that. But when it comes to Europe, that should basically be an ethno state. Scotland for the Scottish, for the Irish, that's the compromise I'm willing to get to. But that being said, we always were a strong white European majority in all these countries. So that needs to be maintained. And that doesn't mean nobody can ever immigrate here. And it doesn't mean it needs to be completely all white. But I also do think we should fully control the government. Because if you look at India, they only have Indians in the government. You look at Asia, they have Asians in their government. I don't think you can serve two masters. And frankly, if I moved to any of those countries, which would be difficult because they would probably reject me if I wasn't adding to their country. But even if I did move there, there's not a chance in hell they would let me run their country. Like that's
that's the craziest thing too. There's a guy that's like he's a full-blown Nazi, but his name's Handsome Truth. Very interesting guy. And I think he's like, I don't really believe too much. Like, I think he's a little extreme. But he talks about this stuff where he trolls people on Omegle, that webcam app. And he was like, do you think that they have white people running the military in Mexico and stuff like that? No. Or any of like the fact that, or like you have white people running the military in Africa, or the government in China. Right. And yet we allow, especially in Canada, there should be nobody in parliament that at least wasn't born here. And we have many MPs that weren't even born here, even in they're taking over everywhere, like especially Indians. And I think this is being done on purpose.
Over AI too, which is terrifying. They're behind our whole tech sector now. And you see the results of that. We have planes falling out of the sky and $9 engineers. It's just been a disaster.
You see their space program.
What?
You see their space program.
Right? Like they put a man on the moon. So clearly these geniuses from India we need, even though we were just fine before. And when 1965, by then we were already a world power. We were the world leader. The country was already powerful. That's why they want to come to it. It's not like they're coming like us to an undeveloped or underdeveloped, to be fair, land and building on it. They're just coming to take and destroy. And half of them funnel that money back into their home country where the currency change makes it a shit ton of money.
Yeah, that's what, like, the point that like these people are systematically taking our money also is crazy, because like all that money that would have been put back into the system for the Canadians' benefits is now being usurped by all these people in India and taken from us. And they've taken over multiple cities pretty much at this point. Now there's in a town over for me, a little city. I guess you could call it a city, but yeah, I guess it's a little city. And an Indian guy is the MP there now, a place that was never was always been majority white. It's crazy. It's everywhere. They're taking over political positions everywhere. And I truly believe that they, with the IQ of 74 collectively or whatever, they really believe in their head. I'm sure most of them have been sold this line that, oh yeah, because that this is now their country that they get to take over because of the justification of the British using a little bit of your resources to build Canada, because it wasn't just the British Empire, right?
Crazy too, because they always say, I don't know if anyone said this to you, that the Brits stole 45 trillion. They're like, just give us our 45 trillion back and we'll leave you alone. Well, the highest the British GDP has ever been is 3.3 trillion. So I don't know where the other 42 trillion you think we stole is, but
they're crazy. They're mentally insane. Like, that's a fact that they're making up all this stuff because they're trying to justify this invasion. That's what exactly it is, and I'm not going to deny it.
Like, they openly admit that they're here to conquer and dismantle our systems because we did that to them. So they're admitting that this is not about them seeking a better life. India's not at war. It might be a trash country, but it's not war-torn. We've never bombed them. I don't know why we are obligated to be a jobs program for them.
And like I said, I've never voted to send my money to Ukraine. I've never voted for mass immigration. I never voted to give millions of dollars to Uganda for gender studies. I've never voted. We don't vote for any of this shit. They just take our money and they do what they want with us while they launder it, especially through Ukraine, which is the child trafficking hub of the world, one of them. And
hey, look, white Christian versus white Christian.
Yeah, destroying
fight Europe, because then we can just kill each other in more brother wars. Like, we don't want this.
Yeah. I think that I truly believe that most of the soldiers, if they saw what happened to their countries now, they would have laid down their arms and joined Germany. I truly believe that.
I think we had to have lost that war. Otherwise, the past, what's it been, like 80 years? They don't make any sense. Because think about it from like a white person's point of view, is how I try to explain it to people. Why would we advocate for us to have less power, less opportunities, less money? If we're in control of everything and we want a world domination, we're trying to force that upon everyone. Why would we be doing that?
Yeah. And it's so crazy, because I believe those wars happened for many different reasons. One of them was to consolidate all the gold and the money into the Federal Reserve, which is owned by a Jew, Rothschild's Federal banking system, right? And then I also believe that it gave the justification to give the Jews Israel. I do believe that is part of it. They created these, both World War I and II are essentially the same war, just carried on. And then there's all these other different reasons, but also another one was to exterminate like millions of people, because there's a quote, I can't remember who it's from, but it's like what was the biggest egotistical thing that someone in power can do is not to send one person to a frying chair, but to send millions off the war to die.
Yep. And that's what they're doing in Ukraine. And it's actually heartbreaking. I've had, or at least this one message that really stuck with me, where this guy from Ukraine went off on me about the West. And I felt horrible because we are basically funding for him to go off and die. You know, he's not wrong for saying that, but we don't have a say in that. If they put it to a popular vote on any of these wars, you would probably get something of like 90% of people saying no. Did you see the fires we had in California? We had no water. They're probably not going to get any help, just like with Hurricane Helene. I want our money going to help our people. If there's excess, I'm okay with accounting provided, helping other countries, but not any of the other bullshit we're doing. It doesn't benefit me, and that's coming from a regular white person who they see as privileged or whatever.
Those fires are not natural in any way. It's weather manipulation. They have patents of this geoengineering. It's very real. And that is a good point. Is like, I've always hated war. I never wanted this shit. Nobody wants this stuff. And there was like one of the biggest demonstrations during the Iraq war, of like literally millions of people in America opposing it, probably in Canada too at that point. I was too young to really be there and know what was going on. But I've seen footage of this, and petitions were signed, all sorts of things were done, and nothing was done about it. It was some of the largest demonstrations, and nothing's done. It doesn't matter how many petitions you sign, how many large demonstrations people have, unless it's literally millions upon millions of people, it's done nothing. The Freedom Convoy in Canada may inspire the world in some regard of standing up against like an authoritarian tyrant who then stayed in his position of power. All this, I made this point on another show, all the same people that destroyed your businesses, that locked you down, that forced you to get an experimental needle, all this shit that they've done to human beings, they're still all in power. That same system that enabled Trudeau to be able to get away with what he did is still there. Everyone is celebrating him resigning, and I did a video and I was like, what are you celebrating? What are you celebrating? He should be in jail for the things that he's done to people, from the scandals and from the treason and all the things. He should technically be hanging from the rafters. Like that should be a real thing. Like, we used to hang people for treason for less than what he's done, but yet he'll get to walk away with all of the money that he stole from Canadians and all the things that he's done, all the policies that have destroyed literally millions of people. And then he gets to walk away, and then Pierre comes into power, and that same system that enabled Trudeau to do that is still there.
And he still agrees on half the bad policies that Trudeau, so it's not really that different, at least from what I've seen. He doesn't look much more conservative than the last dude.
He's been in politics his entire life. He's been a parasite his entire life. He's never worked a real job in his life, and there's a video of him where he's like, I got mud on my boots. Look at me. I'm the common people. And it's like, you've never even worked a hard day in your life. That's why, like, this idea of we should, like, I agree with something that Jeremy McKenzie says about, like, you should have to join the military or be a firefighter or a police officer. You should be able to prove that you can stand up for your people and protect them before you ever go into a government job.
Yeah, no, and I was going to I've been meaning at least to make a video on this, because the more I look into it, I don't think aristocracy is that bad. Because you look at when America kind of started going to shit, it's around the 1960s, so I think similar time frame to Canada.
Almost the exact time.
So many articles online bragging about how they tricked the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants into giving up their power. But before that, if you look at everyone's life, yes, there was inequality. Yes, it wasn't perfect. Yes, they definitely thought they were better than everyone else, but maybe they were a little bit better at leading the country. And the average net worth for a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant at the time that was in government was around $1 million today. So they weren't at a point where they didn't relate to the common person. Like, yes, they were a bit wealthier. They had a bit nicer house, but at the end of the day, they would be at church with everybody else.
There was a politician, Diefenbaker, I think that's how you say his name. He walked to work in Parliament, like not look at like these fake, like there's a guy named Jagmeet Singh. His real name is Jimmy Diwali. He used a name from India to like essentially blend in with their people, even though everyone's name is Singh. So it doesn't mean anything. And they're all like, it means that I'm a prince or a king. The king, I'm related to kingship or some bullshit like that. And it's like if you're all named Singh, it's meaningless. And the fact that probably proves how inbred your country is. 75% of Pakistan is inbred. So it's crazy. My one of my co-hosts, he's I started the show with him. I've been friends with him for my whole life, pretty much, or half of my life, and he's a funny guy. He just comes in and he just does comedy relief a lot of times, and he does these Billy's fun fact of the day, and he did one where he was like, guess how much of America is inbred, and I was like, I don't know, like 24% or whatever like that, and he's like, it's close, 21 or whatever, and I was like, can you tell me how much you think Pakistan is inbred? And I don't know, like 30%, and I was like, he's like 40%. And I was like, he's like, no way, 50%. And I was like 75%. He didn't believe me. He never believes me when I tell him shit like this. And then he looked it up and he was like, oh, 68 to 80%. So 75%. And I was like, yeah, fucked up.
And there's so many studies too on the effects of inbreeding, on how it can make you more violent, less intelligent. Like this is proven. And the biggest problem we have in the West is we're not allowed to like acknowledge reality. Basically, we have to deny reality, censor ourselves in order to not hurt people's feelings. But I'd rather hurt someone's feelings than watch actual people get hurt. So like, if you're asking me to pick the lesser of two evils, I'm just going to be blunt with it. And I think we should all start being that way. I think the idea of political correctness, well, it has correct in the term. You know I'm right. You just don't like what I'm saying, basically.
It's true. And the thing is too, right? It lowers IQ. And there's like 80% of arranged marriages in India is to one of their like first cousins or second cousins. It's crazy. And that's
and I don't want to move to India. So like my thing is, if I really wanted Indian culture, I would move to India.
And that's the point, right?
European culture, but without Europeans, it's just a piece of land.
Mm-hmm. And that's the point where people don't understand. It's like, and I see this a lot. Like, what culture do white people have? White people have more culture than any other ethnicity on earth. That's a fact.
Structures in England or France, like these cathedrals that took hundreds of years to complete. Like, you don't think that's culture? Like, what is culture then?
Yeah, and that's I don't think I was gonna do actually a video on this at some point, just because like I've seen that comment a lot. It's always from some like faceless account. I just wanted to look up the definition because it's interesting to read it. So culture is a collection of ideas, behaviors, material objects that define a group of people, and obviously it's like art, creative expression, storytelling, celebrations. White people literally, you can't say that Germany is the same as England, and England is the same as Scotland, and Ireland is the same as Norway. All of these cultures are very different and have very different traditions and customs and art and culture. Literally, like there's so many, like and even like people are like, what's Canadian culture? We used to know there was Canadian musicians and there's Canadian artists. There's a famous group called the Group of Seven, which is all these different painters. One was named Tom Thompson. That's what my grandfather was named, and he used to do paintings like Tom Thompson. And is this idea? It's literally on our TV shows. We have records of this and documentation of who we are as a people. And everyone, like back in the day, especially 90s, early 2000s, even 10 years ago, when you think about a Canadian, what do you think about? Like maybe a bearded guy with a plaid on, a lumberjack, you know?
Yes, no, and it's even crazier for America. Like, we are the world leader, and I've had people try to argue with me about that. Like, the whole world doesn't trade on the dollar. Like, we're the world leader, point blank. TVs, Hollywood, culture, ours has spread everywhere. So you likely are basically in Western culture, whether or not you're in the West. Like styles of dress, literally everything we've done has spread. And some of that was good. Things like human rights are a Western value. Things like law and order, a due process, not just killing people left and right. Like these are all Western.
Yeah.
ideas.
And Yeah, it is crazy because like this book, Not Stolen, talks about the idea of how like technically quotations progressive, like England was, that they had like queens and women taking over positions of power, and they were the first to end slavery. And a lot of people don't know any of this stuff, and I'm like,
And yet you see a random white person and they blame them for slavery. Yet if they went back to their homeland, they could still be a slave. Slavery is still a thing in places like Africa.
Yeah, that's what's crazy. It's like the first slave was sold, like the first slave to be brought over to the United States for slavery quotations or whatever, right? Because it did happen, but it was done by, like I said, the Bolsheviks, you can call them whatever. We've already done the Protocol Elders of Zion, and I said I don't think all Jewish people are bad. I don't like to generalize people. I think there's things wrong with certain people's cultures and customs and the things that they do, like I said, right? But it is crazy that it was black people that sold themselves into slavery, and then are still doing it to this day.
Yes, and then I think we should learn about slavery. It's a good lesson to learn, but teach both sides. Like we had Black people in America today advocating for us to help end slavery in Africa. I would be totally sympathetic to that, and I would support that. But I don't want to hear about the past from the sense of, oh, you're still bad because you did this, when it was a worldwide thing that happened. Like, I don't feel like it's uniquely evil. Evil, yes. Uniquely, no.
Well, if they don't, it's so funny people try to make the argument too, because they don't even understand that the word slave comes from the word Slavic, from when the white slave trade of the Ottoman Empire, when they were enslaving white people.
Yes, like even by their logic, maybe it was retribution when we did slavery. Like, see how it doesn't make sense when you use past atrocities to justify present conditions.
That's a good point. I should bring that up. I'm like, well, if you're going to complain about slavery from whatever, 500 years ago, then we're going to complain about the slavery that was done to us during the Ottoman Empire, right? And before that too, we were at like the highest price. And I could go on and on about the
America too, and they just rebranded it to calling them indentured servants, but it's the exact same thing as slavery. They just did that to make white people look like they were.
The Irish were. It's like it's funny when I've the one episode I was like we're talking about something in the UK or whatever, and I said to my Irish buddy, I was like, I was like kind of like where you are, and he's like, excuse me? He was like, fuck the British, man, they enslaved my people and colonized them. He was like, I fucking hate the British Empire. And I was like, because like I've traced my one bloodline like way back in the day, but my grandma that has been here, their bloodline for almost 500 years, and probably before that, I have no idea when they actually showed up here, or if maybe at the heart of it they were indigenous. I have no idea, right? But my grandfather that she married, his family came here from England in 1903, and then he endured the Depression and had to work at the age of 11. That's why this idea of white privilege doesn't exist. It's a lie fed to you by Marxist communists, and it's absurd. And I said to him, I was like, who knows? Back in the day, our families were probably fighting each other. So.
Yeah. And there's so many pictures too. Like you can see white people in coal mines, like up on cranes, like stringing up electric fields. Like it was manual hard labor, and we didn't just sit around and order slaves. Like just by the pure population, it was 90% white people at that time. So you think none of them did anything? We all just sat around and made the other like 10%.
No, they built like everything, and some people were like fleeing persecution and all sorts of shit. And it's crazy that people will try to like justify some of those things that happened in the past. And like this idea of white privilege, all my friends that I grew up with were poor, pretty much. We're all like either lower middle class to poor. And lived mediocre, and that like for even in the 90s, and like this idea like we were granted some sort of privilege. Now, the only people that I see being granted privilege is the people that just to get to walk on our soil and then get the money that we pay into the system, and then they get to utilize it for their own selfish needs and for their own people, and then meanwhile it's destroying our people. Like there is refugees that give that just show up here and then get access to healthcare and things that my ancestors built from nothing and then paid into for like generations, and they get to show up here and use it.
And they paid into those things so you would be able to use them and for the country to be passed down to you. I mean, that's just how a heritage works, just how Indians in India created that country to be passed down to their kids. And by their logic, you know, if you're going to come in and colonize us, well, then why can't we come in and imperialize you? Like, do we start that game?
I know, because that's what they're it's crazy, and that's what they're trying to do. And then they get to just utilize the system, and now people are waiting months for organ transplants in Canada, and they will most likely die. So I keep bringing up the fact the amount of people that have died because of mass immigration is absurd. All those children that had to, or even still alive, and had to endure being raped and all this disgusting barbaric things that people from the third world inflicted onto white people, and specifically even targeted white people, didn't need to happen if our governments weren't treasonous and allowed and facilitated this. And that's why I'm like, this is a plan that was written down hundreds of years ago by the New World Order. That's a real thing. They've stated this over and over again, and this is only happening in the Western world. And like we just talked about, other than maybe I think it was Austria that seems decent, but Poland too. Poland seems like the only bastion.
It.
And because they face communism, like I know people, my boss is Polish. His dad lived through communism and saw what happened there. And I got my boss to watch Europa, The Last Battle and stuff like that to show him like what actually happened back then. And I think that documentary is fairly good. I fact checked it. I don't know if you've ever watched it. It's very long. I'm halfway through it.
Yes, I've seen parts of it. I think it's good too. I've read about a lot of the stuff it covers as well. I probably should watch the whole thing at some point, but it's like 10 hours, right?
Yeah, it's 12 hours. I've been watching it for Patreon where I'm just like commentating on it. And I always are like saying like, I don't necessarily believe all of what it's saying just in case or whatever, but I did try to fact check it in live time and research stuff when I was at work and everything like that on break. I was just trying to like figure out, okay, how accurate is this? And I found that it's 75 to 80% accurate, and that the stuff that they can't prove is just quotes that they don't know where it was and stuff like that. It's interesting because when you start to look at that stuff, like I was even talking to my buddy recently, and he was like, well, this or that, and I'm not going to say exactly what we were saying, but I was like, well, look, check out these episodes. Like me and my buddy, we're going to do a second part but we went live and covered the Weimar Republic recently, and that shit is fucked up.
Yeah. And they keep this from people knowing for a reason. There's a reason they only teach almost the Western atrocities, because they want people basically to justify anyone else's actions besides ours. And I'm not trying to justify our actions. I'm just saying there's two sides to that story. And I think if people saw the other side, they would feel differently. And if it wasn't a big deal to hear the other side, they wouldn't go to such lengths to hide it.
Well, that's if you brainwash a nation to hate itself, to hate its ancestors, to hate its heritage, to even hate its own country, then you can facilitate, I believe, a revolution at some point. Maybe it might happen, and then everyone ends up starving to death because no one is going to defend a country that they've been brainwashed to hate and believe that they have no national identity. And I do believe that's what's happening in Canada. I think they want, and I think at some point they will rise up, in the RCMP, the people that are supposed to be protecting us and have the power to throw someone like Trudeau in jail, have admitted that once Canadians, especially the next generation, realizes how broke they are and how they'll never be able to afford anything like a house and stuff like that, that they will revolt. They literally did this. And then meanwhile, they're just trying to jail people for speaking. Like they're trying to throw people in jail for just talking, but yet there's literally crime after crime. We have a catch and release policy now, which is being used on purpose to, order out of chaos is the Illuminati Freemason motto, is to create so much chaos that eventually maybe they have to invoke martial law, and then everyone has to be collected and put into camps. Who knows how far this will go if people don't stand up against this? But the very same people we pay to protect us are the ones facilitating our own destruction, which is the craziest thing. And they know that at some point this is going to happen, but yet they're doing nothing about it. And they've done reports where they know that. And then they're going after their own people that pay their salary. But then there's so many like stabbings, assaults, rapes. These people go in, especially like if you go, anybody that's watching or listening to this, go look at any most wanted list in any major city in Canada and tell me what type of people you see. And then they get out of jail within like literally either hours or days, and then they go commit the exact same crime that they were put in for.
Yeah, no, and I think it really comes down to the brainwashing, where they've kind of made it seem like the worst thing a person in the West can be is racist. And I'm not advocating for racism. I don't think you should be mean to people, but there are far worse things than being racist. For example, being a racist or a rapist, a murderer, a thief. I think all of those are worse than saying mean things. Like if I think about my neighbors, I'd much rather live next to someone that hates white people than an axe murderer. So we need to draw the line where it's really not racist to point out who committed a crime.
No, it's not. And that's what they're trying to do in the UK. Like they're fallen. Like the amount of videos I see coming out from there with the Muslims and then them even trying to berate the women. And there was one video I saw, the lady wearing like a dress and some Muslim chick in a burqa is like, you put some clothes on. Who are you trying to attract or whatever? Or something like that. Like who are you trying to seduce? And she's like, this is my clothes. You choose to wear what you choose. And I choose to wear what I choose to wear. And they're being destroyed through extreme Islam, because if you look at Iran in the 1970s when they were allowing it to be quote unquote more progressive, women were naturalized. They were wearing these clothing like the West. You can see video footage of this stuff. And then I believe that the same people that control all of this, the idea of the same thing as Israel is they use Islam as the broom. They use Islam as the broom to wipe away all the things that they've done, and then they blame it on them. And it's funny that, after 9/11, they said they're going to go after 7 countries. Iran is the last one. All of Israel's regional enemies have fallen recently. And then ISIS, a terrorist group that supposedly works for Islam, has never attacked Israel.
They actually did one time, but they apologized.
Just crazy. So, and people don't know any of this stuff, right? And then so like they're using
Jews are white because they will sometimes act like they are when it's convenient. So we get lumped in with them, and then you get called racist if you point out, like if you're actually looking at their genetics, they're a lot more genetically similar to Turkish people or Middle Eastern people. So they have lighter skin, yes, but we are 2 very separate ethnicities. We have different values. And I hate the way they keep trying to lump us together, like Judeo-Christian is an oxymoron. Our religions are not compatible. I don't know why we need to be super associated with them. Like, I just don't see us, and this doesn't mean I hate them or anything, but we're 2 separate cultures. Like, don't lump us into one thing.
I think people that practice the Talmud are pretty evil, in my opinion. If you just practice the Torah or whatever, like that's what I tell Christians that are trying to stand up for Trump or Zionists or whatever. They think Christ is burning alive in his own semen and excrement. That is in the Talmud.
Yeah, and they openly spit on Christians in Israel.
They hate Christians. They've admitted this.
Yes, no, and even if you read the Bible, though, apparently my interpretation of the Bible is anti-Semitic and not supposed to be legal anymore, but it seems like we also have historically opposed them too. Like I would say they were the antagonists of the Bible.
100%. And all over the country, the 109 countries that they were kicked out of. People don't just get kicked out of a country out of like 1,000 different places, I think it was, for no reason. This is something that it's funny how they seem to be the orchestrator of a lot of this stuff that is going on behind the scenes. And I'm not saying all Jewish people, but I'm saying select certain family bloodlines, like the Rothschilds, the Habsburgs. There's family bloodline, the Orsinis, that people don't even know of. They really, the people that are in control, you'll never know their names. You'll never see their faces. They've been controlling and puppeting this world, I think, for way longer than people understand. And I think they constantly reincarnate back into this world to facilitate our energy being used up. But people don't want to acknowledge this stuff. And then you start to look at it and it's quite obvious that there is, like, I believe, like essentially like a room full of people that control the entire world.
Yes, no. And I think for like the more normal, I guess I would say just regular Jewish people, it's kind of unfortunate for them too. They're similar to India though, where they teach a very tribalist, like it's very taboo to tell on a member of your tribe. So they're taught into almost a similar brainwashing as us, where they're not going to go against their people ever. So I think that's why they tend to get lumped in with that super evil group. And where I kind of lose some sympathy is I would never defend like a Bill Gates. Like if you want to go after our oligarchs, I'm not going to stand in your way, and I would probably agree with you. But it seems like other cultures, and that includes Jewish, they don't feel the same.
I don't have any connection to these reptiles that control the Western world and the government and stuff like that too. And there's a good book I'm reading right now. I wanted to read it because it's a little smaller than Not Stolen. It's a book you'd probably find it interesting. It's actually I'm really enjoying it. Even just I was reading it, and then I got through it, and I was like, I got to chapter 1, and I was like, whoa, that was the introduction. And it's like really good. It's called Illuminati, the Cult That Hijacked the World, and it's written by a Jewish guy who does not like Zionism at all, and he actually points it out very clearly of what's happening. And he said that they're using essentially the Jewish people as a ploy too. They're actually using their own people the same way I believe they used them in World War II to because they I think threw their own people to the wolves.
Who actually went to the concentration camps? Like
Yes.
it probably the super rich oligarch ones. They got out way earlier because there's a Havana Agreement, I believe it's called.
Yeah. And the Havara Agreement or something like that. Yeah, they had this all written down, right? Like they have all this document footage, and I've talked a lot about, and we're gonna get into some crazy episodes on the show. I have an episode. I told my buddy, I was like, everyone talks about all the bad things Hitler did, and I do think he did bad things. I think they got to him and they used him, but I have a whole episode written about the good things that he did for Germany. Because I was like, hey, if people want to hear a different version of what reality and history is, I think that at the beginning he may have been a true nationalist guy standing up for his country. I think that they who knows, hopped him up on a bunch of drugs and then were able to brainwash him. They were also contacting the Vril and these involved in weird secret societies. So there's the side of people, it's crazy, that think like he's this like good guy that was staying up for his country and stuff like that. And then there's the other side where he was the most evil man in history. I do think he's one of the most lied about people in history. But then there's the people like me that are in the middle being like, I think there's more to this story than what they're trying to tell you. Like,
well, I would say the whole reason that war mostly got started was he cut ties with the central banking. Like if you even find clippings, that seems to be what the biggest conflict was. I haven't looked too much into him. I kind of figured the same conclusion though. I mean, to be a dictator, you have to have a certain will to power, if you will. So it's definitely possible he got subverted, and I don't think people should idolize him by any means. But I think we should look at him like we look at everyone else, and if I compare him to Stalin objectively was worse. So why are we taught?
Yeah, he's the most evil man. Yeah, because Stalin killed way, way more people and did way worse things, in my opinion. And the interesting thing is, I'll point this out again, I already said it on the show, but the people who liberated the quote-unquote death camps were all Soviets, all of them. So I'm like, there's some weird, and the fact that like they say that not one person alive today wasn't touched by the war in Russia. That every person alive in Russia, at least some of their family members, were touched by these atrocities of wars. And what communism did to the people, Eastern Europeans and white people, is far worse than fascism in regard of studying history. And
like in and of itself, I don't think is evil, because it's just basically a dictatorship. But there are not good, but it's just a way of ruling. The monarchy could be a form of fascism if you really wanted to look into it. The monarchy is not great either, but clearly this democracy, which it was never supposed to be that, but what we currently have sucks also. So it's just a different system, in my opinion.
And that's what's interesting. We'll bring this to a close soon, but the idea of like a dictator, there was a reason the Roman Empire, I think, was evil and crazy shit was going on there. But there was times in the Roman Empire where there was probably good things happening, and they would use someone like, I can't remember the one story. I should get the one guys from Dagalon, Alex, to come on and talk about this stuff. But there was one guy they chose. Everyone voted for this one guy to be a dictator for a while because everything was falling apart. And then they needed one guy to come in and just try to fix everything. And he was some farmer. He came in, he fixed a bunch of shit, and then just gave up his power back to the people. Almost like in the movie Gladiator, the same thing where he was given this power and he wanted to give it back to the people. And at the same time, right, extreme situations need extreme essentially solutions. And that's a fact. We're living in a very extreme situation. We got fires everywhere. They're using the climate change agenda. They're facilitating destruction of countries through weather systems like HARP, I believe, and chemtrails, and they're constantly poisoning us. They're pushing us into World War III. They're sacrificing millions of men at this point. I feel like it's going to be millions of men in Ukraine. The systematic destruction of even just the world right now. This is happening. I've had people all over the world tell me this is happening everywhere, not just even in the Western world. We're the main target, I believe, because we've always stood up and will fight against atrocities and bad things. And we have the intellectual capability to see these things coming and want to and realize what's happening. But like, this is all happening for on purpose. They're doing this for a reason.
And it's happening. The reason it's been able to happen is they've been able to weaken us and make us almost guilt us, I would say, into thinking we need to give up power. I think if people were truly honest with themselves on if they would choose between the two, a government that looks like them and is diverse and equally representative versus a government of full white people, if all the white people were giving them a better life, I don't think they'd care who governed them.
No. And that's interesting too, because like it's the idea of like, when I look at Parliament, do I think this Sikh guy with a turban on that doesn't share the same cultural heritage as me, that doesn't share the same traditions or values or morals or ethics, and had things like the stuff that was going on in India still is disgusting and disturbing to me. I don't look at him and then think like he represents me, you know?
And they also clearly advocate for their foreign interests once they get into power. All they want to do is bring in more people from the place they came from. Like, you're not advocating for America. You're not loyal to America. And that's fine. That's completely understandable, but you shouldn't be in government.
Yeah, and I don't think all Indian people are bad. Like, I work with a guy that I actually really like. I always joke that he's white on the inside because he likes our kind of culture and stuff like that and tries to adapt. And I find it's weird because some people like think that Hindus are bad and some people think the Sikhs are bad. From what I've seen, the Hindus they seem to assimilate more when they come here and stuff like that. And even he's paid a lot into come here and to work as a machinist, but then he's watching like people just come in, and even I had a buddy from Romania, same thing, came here, paid a lot of money, worked his ass off, and then had to spend tons of money on lawyers to bring his wife over here, and then he watched all these immigrants just in refugees being paid all this money and stuff like that, and I'm not saying this is all people, but even they see what's going on. Even there is Indian people that I've talked to that see that this is bad. There's even one guy that interviews a bunch of people, and he's like, what do you think the biggest problem in Canada is? And this guy is like, there's too many Indians. And he's like, I am Indian, and I think this is a problem. So even the Indians, so people are like, oh, they've been here forever. That's not true. Most of the Indian population started coming here. Even the small population that's been here for a couple of a generation or two started coming here in the late 80s to 90s. And they think that they've always been here. That's not true. But the people that were like the Indian people that were born in this country are being like, these people are fucking animals and they're destroying this country and they're wanting to only benefit their own people. And that doesn't even include the people that have been here for generations.
Yeah, no, and I think that's an understated point of like, I think there are immigrants that have done it right. They've worked hard to be here. They've done their share. I'm not suggesting we necessarily remigrate everyone. It's more the quantity of how many we're bringing in a short period of time. It's very obvious they're not going to assimilate. They're going to stick to their own. And no country can handle large groups of people being just pouring into the country. Like, it's unsustainable. So on an individual level, there's people of all races that I like and appreciate. And it's not about an individual per se, but it's a group size and just the mass migration. I don't care if it's illegal or legal. Legal is honestly maybe worse because at least with illegal, people generally are on the same page with like, okay, shouldn't enter a country illegally. But when you make it legal, they're like, oh, well, you can't just strip them of their citizenship, which we could. But yeah, it's a lot harder to...
We should be deporting so many fucking people in this country. It's crazy.
We already pay for them to have socialist healthcare in their own country. Why are we also paying for it here?
It's so crazy. And like I want to make this point to kind of end it on that at the end of the day, right? Like people are going to stop tolerating this. It's going to get worse, especially the more people that see it. There are still 25 million Canadians that are Canadian, that are actual Canadians. A quarter of this country wasn't born here. Our population grew in the matter of like 10 years by millions of people that shouldn't be here to begin with. And at some point that 25, why they get away with it too, more or less too, is because we're more widespread. We're like, and there's parts of the country where you'll drive for miles and there's nothing there, and they're not building new towns, new hospitals, barely. They're not really building anything to help like to facilitate this idea of mass immigration and this replacement population theory of this. Like they told Canadians in the 80s not to have kids. They said the country was overpopulated, so they brainwashed the own people to be like, stop having kids. Oh, so we can replace you.
Yeah, no, and even in Canada, y'all's MAID program, which I think is horrifying. It's just a complete lack of value for human life. We're supposed to take care of our elderly. Like that's why they pay into the system, is to be taken care of when they're older, not
to get killed. They're trying to push that on children to, if you have mental health issues. They've killed, think about this, with MAID, the medical assistance in dying, they have killed as many people, as many Canadians as World War II did.
It's a sign of a falling empire, like the lack of regard for human life. They just want us depopulated and gone. And I know a lot of people, that's a really scary reality to acknowledge, but what happens if we don't acknowledge it?
Yeah, we're just gonna let it happen. And that I like the quote of if you want to look at what you want to look at a society, you have to, in their behavior and their morals and ethics, you have to look at how they treat their most vulnerable, their children and their elderly. And if they're treating their children and elderly horrible and allowing things to happen, like the amount of people that were killed and even accidents, because fucking we gotta admit it, Indians don't know how to drive. They've literally killed a ton of people.
Well,
They've killed.
America can't speak English, so they can't read road signs.
Yeah. And they're speaking, I could talk about this for hours, because they're speaking Punjabi, singing the national anthem of Canada in a hockey game in Punjabi. And if that happened anywhere else, especially in places like China or Japan, they would have probably shot them.
Oh yeah. No,
it's
not racist not to tolerate ridiculous things. I did have one thing I wanted to ask you though, before we end. What do you think about Trump trying to connect our two countries?
Yeah.
Let us with it. People weren't receptive to the HB1.
Oh, it's it's crazy. I was gonna actually talk about this. So I'm glad that you brought it up. I think it's fucking crazy. I think it's part of the New World Order. It's so many people were like, well, Trump's gonna come save you. Like I did a video that I was talking about Canadians now they need to stick together and fight against what's happening. The amount of people, like at this point, like I don't even care. I'll go through all the comments and just delete the people I hate, because I'm like, or saying some stupid bullshit on a faceless account, because I don't care. I don't care what you have to say. You keep talking behind your faceless account or whatever, right? But I was like, I did a video on this where the guy's like, embrace the eagle, join us or whatever like that. And I said, so I was like, demoralize the people to hate themselves, to destroy their own cultural heritage, and to facilitate their own destruction, erase the borders and bring in a one world globalist government. I was like, what does that sound like to you? It sounds like the New World Order. And the Trump literally said the artificial line.
I know.
So he is part of it. He is part of the New World Order. They're going to use, this is what I think is going to happen. They're going to use him, and they could kill him for all we know, to bring in this idea of patriotism. And I said this, I think you should, I'm going to play a song at the end of this. That's like a little music video I made. And if you want to stick around just to listen to the song, you'll hear me talk about this stuff. They use the idea of patriotism. So I have a feeling that they're going to use Trump. Everyone's all amped up. Yeah, Trump's in power because they've all been brainwashed. He's the biggest Zionist bootlicker. He kissed the Western Wall. He's been taught by rabbis and all sorts of shit. He wants to put Israel first. But I think that he could use this idea of patriotism to bring America into World War III, even though he was like, everyone's like, he's going to end all the wars. He's going to stop all this stuff. Not necessarily. If something bad happens and they use the problem reaction solution method, you create the problem, everyone reacts to it, you invoke the reaction you need to give the solution for the very problem you created, then he said he's going to decimate Iran. So they're going to bring us into World War III, in my opinion. And then millions of white people go off to die, and they use this idea of patriotism to fight for your country. But what are you fighting for? All of my ancestors and all our ancestors and the people that died in World War I and II, they, in my opinion, really died for nothing.
Yes, no, I agree. And I thought it's kind of been my theory on Trump for a while. Like I said earlier, I think he's a really good salesperson. And they've almost been doing this like persecution of him to make people more loyal and think, oh, this guy's fighting the establishment. The establishment hates him. But I think that's just all like political theater. I think they're pretending to persecute him so that he comes in and is like this messiah-like figure that people will just follow blindly.
He said he was gonna pretty much exterminate anyone that was anti-Semitic. He said some crazy shit like that, and they're gonna pass anti-Semitic laws. And I played a video where a rabbi is talking about how Trump is the non-Jewish messiah. There's a guy named Adam Green. If you're not aware of him, you should look up his stuff on Rumble. The guy is on point when it comes to this whole Zionist stuff, and he's not a fan of. I'm not Christian. I do align with Christian morals, ethics, ideologies mostly and stuff like that. I think religion was devised to divide and conquer us from some force beyond our idea. But I do have a lot of people that push me towards Christianity, and I know a lot of people. I've talked to a couple of my close buddies are Christians. Well, actually, one's Jehovah and stuff like that. So I'm aware of like the beliefs, and I was raised Christian. I was baptized and stuff.
Yeah, no, religion stems, it's like culture, it stems from race. And I mean, white people have historically been Christians. When you look at the prophecies for the Israelites, which were a people, not a place, by the way.
And not the Jewish people. If you look in the Khazarian Mafia.
The people that fulfilled almost every single one of those, or actually every one of those prophecies, in my opinion, was our people. So I don't think it's the Bible that's, it's the way it's.
Okay, repeat that. You froze for a sec.
Oh, I was just saying, I've read the Bible and it seems historically accurate to me if you don't read it from the perspective of how pastors are preaching it, which is like a distorted, almost like fake Christianity. And it's just not what the book says. Like there's so many people that are like, Bible says don't judge. Like it really doesn't. It says to judge, but don't be a hypocrite.
They don't even know their own shit sometimes. I was at almost everyone I work with is Christian, almost, other than the two Indian dudes. And we're at this like dinner, and we go off sometimes because my boss doesn't care. We're like all joking around. There's a kid I work with. He sets the Jew counter to see how many times I bring up that shit. And we were talking, and they were like, I'm like, I was like, you can't turn another cheek. I was like, Jesus flipped tables for usury and stuff like that. And they're like, what? No, he didn't. And the one kid, Matt, that's like 19, 20. He's like, yeah, actually he did. And he's like, show me. And I just Googled it real quick. And like, I hate using Google. It's on my BlackRock, but I was like, look, there's the verse right there. And the one kid that's like super Christian didn't know about that. And I was like, yeah, he like whipped people out of the fucking synagogue.
Yes, there's a lot of people that just go to church and they hear like sermons, but they've never actually read it themselves. I guess the point I was trying to make with that though is there's this quote by, I think his name is Richard Dawkins. He's a huge atheist, but near the end of his life, he's like, well, honestly, I feel mixed about the decline of Christianity, not because I like it, but only in the sense that I feel like it's a almost border to something much worse. So
I agree.
Basically, my point is I think any Western person would much rather and be completely fine in a Christian society, because that would include freedom of religion unless they got tyrannical, than they would be with what's taken its place, which we have secularism. And I just think secularism has failed.
Yeah. And there's good and things.
Other things.
Yeah, there's good and bad things about the Bible. I do think that to understand religion is one thing, right? And a lot of stuff stems from Zoroastrianism. Like you can trace back where a lot of the religions and stuff come from. I read a little bit of the Quran when I was younger. It's pretty fucking weird, man. There is like, and that's the end of the day. Like, I don't know. Christianity seems like the one that could be close enough to the truth, but then you start studying the Anunnaki and some of the stuff like that, like I think that there are stories within the Bible that are true, but I also think that it was written by a man of his experiences of things that he was experiencing. So you could interpret it in many different ways. But then like people like Muhammad, a guy that literally has orange hair, like who knows what he actually was, but he had an orange beard. That's really weird, that whole thing. And then you can't talk about it or you get murdered. I don't think it's not really a good religion. I have Christian family, Christian friends. They're the nicest, most caring and loving people I've ever talked to. I don't see the same on the other side.
Yes, and that's almost what I mean by it, because they fear nationalism, they fear white people, and they also hate Christianity. So it's like, you got to kind of look at it as, why do y'all hate this religion? And I think the biggest thing with it is, I think it's something like 69 out of the 167 countries don't have freedom of religion. So that is a Christian value. Obviously, it could be twisted to where the people are like, and that's not to say bad things haven't been done by religious people or Christians. I just think it's better than the alternative of what's been able to creep in since we culture.
Well, everyone's like wants to talk about the Crusades and stuff like that. But like a lot of people point that they were justified because like the Muslims were coming in and invading and all this shit. So I'm like, yeah, you have to eventually fight back. But I think that they were controlled in the same way. Like I think Catholicism is something entirely different too. But like the Vatican and the Jesuits and some of these secret orders were not inherently good. And there was people within those that were maybe started as good. But at the end of the day, I do believe that they are trying to destroy all religion. If you read Albert Pike's writings, he talks about this stuff about they have to destroy. This is my thing. I think they want to use all of this to destroy the Western world. And the idea is to build the third temple. Trump might do that for Israel. And their beliefs is Jesus Christ wasn't the Messiah. So they need to bring about their Messiah, who might be fucking Lucifer. And they have to do this by facilitating wars. And I think that it's not this idea that these prophecies are happening. I think that they're making the prophecies happen to bring about their Messiah.
It doesn't matter whether they're forcing it or not, because God uses man to fulfill his will. But what I will say is, in the Bible, if you read like Daniel and Revelation, the person they describe as the Antichrist, Trump weirdly fits the description, like eerily so. And it even starts with the sound of the trumpet. So his name is all over it. So
you need to listen to an episode I did.
Trumpets starts with the sound of the trumpets.
Yeah, it's okay. So I had this dude, Brandon Kroll, on. Interesting dude. Like I like him. I think he's a good dude. I think he's a little bit consumed by his doctrine a little too much, in my opinion. But I do like him. Like I'd have him back on the show. I have open arms for all the guests that I've had on or whatever, and I want to create communities. He believes that Trump is the Antichrist. We did 2 parts on this. In the second part, we released right at the time when Trump was getting elected again, or like November 5th or whatever. I think I put it on the 4th or some shit. And wherever you listen, I'll send you the links to those 2 episodes. I think you'll find it pretty interesting.
Well, it's crazy because I've thought this, like I kind of had suspicions for a year or 2, but I remember I was going out with this guy and I told him, well, you'll know I'm right if he survives an assassination attempt. And I said this like a while ago. And then he survives it, and I get a text like, holy shit. Like,
yeah, I was going to say, when I was talking about that rabbi calling him the non-Jewish Messiah, played a clip on the Protocol Elders of Zion episode. I think that's the episode I did. And that's why I was like, these people are saying it's not me. This rabbi said that symbolically, the messenger or whatever needs to be pierced through the right ear. He says this. It's a ritual. Everything you see, I want everyone to really realize that the entire world is a stage, and everything you see is being done on purpose to persuade even the things happening in California, Gavin Newsom coming in, acting like he's a big shot. All the things that are happening are being done on purpose to brainwash and persuade you and program you to believe in this artificial world that we exist in. And I think that there is, evil definitely exists here. Everyone can feel it. If you can't, you're probably evil.
Well, what's interesting too is from the lens of, I think the Bible is true. I think the people that are evil also believe it to be true, and they think they can thwart God almost. So they're trying to change the ending, and they're trying to bring this about because their Messiah comes, and their time is limited anyway. Like they know the clock is ticking. It can only go on for so long before basically the whole planet combusts. So I think they are forcing these prophecies, and I think they're accelerating it now that people are starting to like wake up to it. But even if they're forcing the prophecies, they're still happening. I
know, it's crazy. And yeah, because I do think that that's what they want to do, and they want to facilitate the destruction of the world because they want to become gods themselves. That's they do truly believe in that. If you study anything to do with the Torah, or at least the Talmud, and what they really believe and what these people are actually saying. Not that I'm saying it, but the rabbis and all that stuff. If you just listen to their videos and what they're saying, or the people in Israel and how they talk about the Goyim and all this stuff, if you actually pay attention, it's pretty obvious what they're doing. And they want it like the Tower of Babel. They want to try to become God. And I truly believe that's what's happening. It has to do with the transgender movement, transhumanism, all that stuff is being facilitated on purpose.
And everything the Bible said to do and inverted it. And it's also bigoted to point out like half the things they've done. But even though the Bible would say, if people actually read it, that these things are wrong and bad, and for why, because there's historical reference. But yeah, you're like bigoted for not wanting multiculturalism, but
it's a cult, MultiCULTuralism. This has been a really great conversation. I figured that I figured it, as weird as it is, I was like, oh, maybe we'll do like an hour or whatever. I figured that we would go off for a while because I feel like once the conversation started flowing, I could already tell by the way you did your videos and stuff like that, that you were pretty intellectual female about this stuff. And it's interesting because I've said this before. I see more females standing up and speaking out than I do a lot of men.
More risk involved for men almost. But for the same reason, like, I think girls are better at like HR positions. Sometimes you need like a softer approach to reach women. And once women flip, I think the men are.
Yeah, there's some people that follow me on TikTok. And I just read this comment of this one chick, and she was like, I was talking about Trudeau, and I was being like, this fucking tyrant. I'm like, and I'm like, you know, I'm aggressive. I'm a man. I have testosterone, right? And she was like, I wish you weren't so angry in your videos, and I think I would enjoy them more. And I was like, yeah, but that's not authentic though. I'm aggravated by the situation because it's not good. And men inherently, that's anger can be used as a tool actually to incite like revolutions. And I'm not saying anything. I do think the way out of this is peaceful. For all the people listening and watching and want to take shit out of context, I believe in peaceful revolutions and not a communist type revolution. I believe in realizing that people do have the power. And at the end of the day, if you either embrace your nationalism and your national identity or you cease to exist, you have a choice.
Yes. And if you're going to die anyway, might as well, you know, play to win.
Yeah, I know. And there's people that are going to be decimated by probably what's going to happen. But this is why people need to become stronger, mentally sound. And this is why I do think that there is some sort of hierarchy between men and women. I think I love this quote. Strong men protect women. Strong women protect children. Strong families protect society.
Yes, no, I totally agree. And I think there's different roles to play. That's one of the reasons I started speaking out is realistically, I'm not going to be the one fighting in this. I won't be at the front lines, probably not going to get sent to war, hopefully.
Yeah.
But the least I can do is be supportive. And I think just having it not feel like a taboo for guys to have these opinions is really important. My audience on TikTok, I want to say it's like 30% women, but I have so many women reach out to me like, thank you for saying all this. So there's a lot more people that agree or starting to agree than I think people think.
Yeah, everyone's starting to get there. And like I said, right, even the thing with Canada and you know, the United States joining it together. I'm like, so what? Then they can send all of our children off the war to die because that will be part of it. Because most times Canadians don't have a draft, and I think they did it in the First World War, and then people were pissed. And then the Second World War, a lot of people said "fuck you" in Canada and didn't go.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. Like, and I feel like if they did draft people, they wouldn't draft the immigrants. They would try to get rid of all the men, just like everywhere.
Yeah, and I've said that before. That's the whole reason why they do this stuff. So yeah, if you want to stick around and hear the song, I think you would actually like it. So I want you to share all your stuff. I definitely want to get you back on at some point. I think there's still much more to touch upon. Even at some point it'd be interesting to like bring up clips or something like that. Like when I invited you on, I did this because I thought that I didn't know how long the conversation would go, but I thought that we'd probably want to bring you back on at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to come back on. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
It's been eye-opening, I think, for some people. And I just want to say, at the end of the day, I do truly believe in, and I know you do too, in and advocate for the human rights of all people, for all people to have freedom. But also, we're watching our own people be destroyed. I can see it every day, and everyone's starting to see it. Even my cousin in Toronto, we were just talking about this at a family event. He was like, "I grew up in Toronto, one of the most diverse cities in the entire world. I was the minority. I was like one of the only white kids in my high school, you know." And he was like, and he's like, I got along with all these different people. I had so many different friends from all different walks of life, literally. And he saw crazy shit living in that city. And now he's like, we used to butt heads on some conspiracy stuff. And now he saw what was happening. And he was like, until I was told I can't be white, that it's not okay for me to be white. He's like, then I'm fucking done with this. I can see it everywhere. It's happening. I'm not allowed to be a white guy.
Yes, like they basically don't want us to exist. And I just don't think it's bad for us to advocate for ourselves. At the end of the day, we can't help anyone if we can't help ourselves. So we need to house in order before we start trying to, play all around the world.
I agree.
Now, because of our weak leadership, is impacting everyone. So I feel like it is, as much as people don't want to admit it, it's in everyone's interest for different people to be in charge of our government. I agree. And people are going to have to collectivize. So our way out of here is out of this glass prison that they've built around us is collectivism. So shout out your stuff. Tell people where to find you. So I'm on TikTok at MKwhataboutit. Twitter, same username, and Instagram, same username. So just MKwhataboutit. Go check out her stuff. It's pretty incredible. You're a very intelligent and articulate woman. It was really good to have you on. Everybody, give us 5-star rating reviews. You can buy merch. I'm sure you like this one. You can get a fuck communism shirt on the website. Yeah, I wear this in public all the time. I don't even give a shit. I get weird looks. So everybody support the show. I'd appreciate it. Yeah, you can go to the website. You can find all the links in the bottom, and we'll cut, especially for the people, maybe even leave it up for the people on audio, is I'm going to play one of my songs called World War. And yeah, check it out. You'll like it. As soon as the song's done, you'll see where it like tapers off. We're going to end the stream, and then yeah, you can, I'll contact you. I'll tell you when the episode's out, and we'll, I'll cut some clips and all that stuff, and we'll collaborate, and it should be a fun time. But you'll see that why I based it off of the beginning speech. Awesome. Sounds good. All right. Well, everybody stay strange out there.
Lives are at stake, and millions of people are killed. Countries are destroyed, ruined forever. Endless sums of money are spilled into God knows where, faster or as fast as the blood gets spilled on the ground, and you'll never get either back. Those people are dead forever. All of their potential, everything they ever could have done, everything we all could have done together, gone forever, wiped out, destroyed. All the money that we used to make sure that happened, we can't even give them, they can't even give them any kind of memorial. We can't even build them anything worthy of a legacy remembering, because we're broke, because we sent all that money away to anything we could have done with it in the future. Anything we could have used it for to really help people, we can't, because it went out the window to an endless death machine that only exists to consume more souls so it can enrich its owners. You would hope, you would pray for the love of God, that one obvious constant, everybody knows it in the world, it's true. It's true. Stand up and point at it and say what it is. For God's sakes! You want to be the leader, you want to run the whole show, and you can't even admit, hey, has anyone noticed the giant monster in the room? Poor boys fight wars for rich men. What will you die for? Reload the rifle ammunition. Albert Pike wrote up a 3 World War prediction. Brave men unknowingly fought and died for communism. Blame it on the hate, then kill the goyim and play the victim. Convinced to destroy each other in the name of patriotism. Then crying, stand over their graves as their children. That man's a soldier enslaved to the business of killing. Millions of lives stolen for Bolshevism. Hide the gold in Switzerland. Use propaganda to mind control the citizens. War is not the answer. Kill for profit like you're sick with cancer. Godless monsters with the sickle and hammer. Talk shit while you're waving your ridiculous banner. You aren't saving a soul. The cost of human lives in war has taken its toll. It's a form of population control to kill off all the strong men and rob a nation of its gold, while world leaders talk with Satan on his throne and bomb civilization until we're back in the age of stone. Israel infiltrate the states and own all your politicians and control the way you vote. If you think you have a choice, you fucking don't. History is an agreed upon fable, so read books that contradict your beliefs if you're able to open your mind to the lies you were fed. Violent by design, society is led by tyrants in disguise and suit and ties who rule through lies. Look in their eyes, they're dead, no soul to be seen. They use the media to mold what you believe. Hold your feet to the fire and make you pay for the coal that's beneath. The greed of an empire that's never known defeat, funding both sides of the conflict. No amount of lives is worth this nonsense. War is good for business, invest your son. You should pray for forgiveness for all the death you've brought. Peace will never come when it's offered at the end of a gun.